me a panel. My name is Nate Derbinsky. I'm an associate teaching professor and director of teaching faculty at Northeastern University in Boston. I do research in declarative memory systems and SOAR and distributed optimization and machine learning. And I care deeply about the intersection of AI and education. And so I've spent the last couple of years chairing EAI, which is Educational Advances in AI. So I'm really excited to moderate this panel on how to prepare the next generation of cognitive systems researchers. And so for everybody to know the general format we're going to take from here is we have 4 amazing panelists. They each have prepared 10-ish minutes of kind of slides of discussion. We'll go through them one by one individually, where they'll introduce themselves, their teaching, some of the challenges they see along this theme, and some of the ideas and asks of the community. And so during that time, as you have questions and thoughts, please go ahead and put them in the Slack channel. And then I'll try to kind of bring those up for discussion as we come back. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Maithilee Kunda.
Thank you, Nate. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to join you all this afternoon. I guess let me get my screen shared here. Can you all see this slide now?
All good.
All right, great. Oh yes, I actually meant to say there's a giant thunderstorm right now, so if I disappear, then please just continue without me, and I apologize, but hopefully I'll make it through. Okay, so I'm an assistant professor of computer science and computer engineering at Vanderbilt University, which is a private school in Nashville. We have about 6,000 undergrads, I think. Like everywhere, we're having burgeoning CS major enrollments. So we have lots and lots of students, especially students who are interested in AI, which is great. Vanderbilt is really interdisciplinary, which I have really enjoyed with the cognitive systems research that I do. So we have lots of programs in psychology and neuroscience, and even faculty members in English and history who are really interested in AI. So it's been, it's a really great community for sort of talking about interdisciplinary aspects of computer science and AI. And we get a lot of really great students as a result too, who are interested in kind of the interdisciplinary angles on AI. So for example, I had a neuroscience PhD student who hung out in our lab as a postdoc for a while, which was super great for everyone. My research is in AI and visual imagery. There's, in the pre-pandemic when we could all still hang out together, there's a snapshot of students. So I have, all kinds of levels of students. And again, with the students, they're coming from different backgrounds, which makes for some really nice research conversations. Yes, my courses that I teach. So so I teach around a course a semester, generally alternating grad and undergrad courses. And I've been really fortunate at Vanderbilt because we have, because there's so many students and because our CS faculty size is relatively small, we actually end up having a lot of flexibility in what we'd like to teach. And so this is, these are basically the courses that I've taught since being here. I started our undergraduate machine learning course because there wasn't one when I came here. And then right now, or this fall, I'm teaching undergrad AI, which I taught last year too. And then with the grad courses, I've taught our sort of general grad AI course, plus a couple of sort of special topics courses that are more around my research area. Computation and cognition is really similar to a course that Ashok Goel taught at Georgia Tech. Actually, it's kind of similar to 2 of his courses. There was at Georgia Tech, there was this introduction to cognitive science kind of for CS people, and then also the knowledge-based AI cognitive systems course. And so this course is that. And I'm also lucky at Vanderbilt, so I have a colleague, Doug Fisher, who's also kind of a cognitive systems type person, and so then he's now teaching that particular course. And then I also have started a course that I call imagery-based AI that's about my research area. So that's just a little rundown. And like I said, I'm really lucky. I've really enjoyed being able to teach all of these things, including, in the machine learning and AI courses. I like sprinkling in a lot of, thoughts about human cognition and questions for the students. Yeah. Okay, so now I think moving on to some of the challenges. So I would say the biggest challenge I have in teaching students about cognitive systems these days is, well, this story will sort of summarize what the challenge is. So on the first day in a lot of my courses, and even when I like give talks around campus, I will write this on the board in like big, big, big letters, like without even saying anything. I'll just like write this on the board. And of course, you know, like among the students, there are all kinds of like gasps of disbelief and, you know, like, what is she talking about? And, you know, confusion, because I think, you know, so AI does not equal machine learning. I think there's so much excitement and energy and jobs and, you know, conferences that are really focused on machine learning, and students really just kind of equate those things. So like, for example, last fall in my AI, which is like my intro AI course, kind of like the Russell and Norvig, you know, search and constraints, and we do some reinforcement learning too. I told them at the beginning, I said, we're not actually doing any neural networks in this course, which is last semester, we were doing other things. And the students were, I mean, that's like what they thought the whole course was going to be about. And of course, there's all kinds of variants on this too that I, you know, also write on the board. You know, I think, again, you know, it's just a lot of the students just think of these things as being equal. And I'll tell a quick story that kind of illustrates this challenge also. So in one of my machine learning courses, we had gone the whole semester, this was a couple of years ago, we'd gone the whole semester and, you know, talked about all kinds, you know, supervised learning and this and that, you know, all these exciting things. And then at the end, I had this really exciting idea. I was so excited about this. So I don't know if any of you have ever played the game Dixit. It's a board game. It's super amazing. It's kind of like apples to apples, but with like artwork and creative thinking. It's so I had a copy of that game and I brought it to class and we all sat there and like played it. You know, the students divided up in little groups and they played the game for a little while. And then we were supposed to have this discussion for the second half of the class, which was I was going to ask them, you know, like, how would you build an AI system to play this game? And if you've played this game, I mean, this is not like, you know, this game is not Go. Like there's social reasoning and there's, you know, humor and there's inside jokes and there's cultural, you know, there's so much going on. And so I envisioned, you know, we all have these visions. I had this vision of like, oh, it would be this just wonderful discussion. The students, we talked about all these different kinds of knowledge that you would need and all this. And basically like almost like most of the students gave an answer that was basically like, oh, you would want to like collect a lot of examples of people playing the game and then train a neural network on them. So that was kind of a good lesson for me to see where, you know, where their mind was in thinking about these kinds of problems. Another challenge I'll mention, this is, I'm kind of coming to the end here. I'll tell you another story about students. So I have this computation and cognition class where we talk about, you know, computational theories of cognition and how different, we use that really nice book, Mind by Paul Fagard, where it talks, you know, it really lays out beautifully, I think, how different computational models have different purposes. Different computational theories, and you can, you know, and some of them are intended to be like psychologically plausible, and some of them are intended to be for practical things. And it, you know, so the final project for this class was the students all had to build a program that would be like a cognitive model of something, just like anything that humans do. And it didn't have to be a great model or a realistic model or anything, but just some model. They would build something, you know, something they're interested in, and then they would write about all of the ways that it, you know, was or wasn't a good cognitive model. And so these one group of undergrads I had, they had this idea of they wanted to build a model of how people generate random, you know, quote, random numbers, which I thought was a great idea, right? Because it's like if you, and there's all kinds of research, right? Like if you ask somebody to generate a string of random numbers, people will give you a list of numbers that's like not at all random. And there's these patterns that are kind of, it shows some of our biases about what we think of randomness. So anyway, so I asked the students this, and then I said, so how are you going to do this? You know, like, and I was imagining, you know, like all kinds of things you could do with, you know, you assume that you have like some short-term memory, and then you're picking numbers, and you have this similar, you don't want to pick the same number twice, and, you know, you're like writing some of these things in and talking about them. So the students came back and they said to me, oh, like, we want to go around campus and ask a bunch of people to generate random numbers for us, and then we'll train a model on that data. And again, like, it was, I mean, it wasn't a bad idea that they had, but it wasn't a cognitive model. Like the model they were talking about was not modeling any kind of process that could be happening in someone's head. It was, you know, finding patterns in a person's external behaviors. So again, I mean, that was just kind of like an interesting moment for me, which is like after an entire semester of talking about this in class, like something I had not sort of conveyed to them enough, you know, what I was talking about, I guess. So I think I just have one more slide and then I'll be done. So we were supposed to think about asks for the community. So I have one, well, in addition to kind of, you know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on those earlier issues. So one thing that I would love to have, and I don't know if this exists, like, does anybody have a really good diagram that shows like all the parts of AI, you know, like here's planning and here's, you know, like everything is all over. I specifically also added here, like not a timeline, because I've seen timelines, but the problem with timelines is, you know, like, I mean, anyways, I think a lot of students that I talk to, I think they have this idea that these other methods are like outdated methods. And so that's why I kind of, I mean, timelines are nice also, but I would just love if anybody had like a diagram, you know, that we could show on, that I could show on the first day instead of just writing my like not equals thing. So that is, that's all I have. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much. Really great stories. So next up, we will have Justin Lee.
Is my slides and sound coming across?
You're all good.
Okay, so I'm Justin Lee. I think I introduced myself a little earlier with the poster, but now I get to talk a bit more about my experience at Occidental College. So just some brief background on myself. I was a grad student under John Laird at Michigan. So I was part of a SOAR group, and then I started Occidental in 2015. For those of you who don't know, Occidental College is a small liberal arts college in LA, and I was actually hired at the time by the cognitive science department because Occidental somehow managed to be a place without a computer science department until 2017, when I was one of the co-founders for the department. So that introduced some really interesting context that's going to come back in some of the later slides. My research is in strategic knowledge search. So this is really about how people and artificial agents can find the right piece of knowledge at the right time. In particular, I think a lot about how knowledge search in people is not atomic, right? So it's not just you ask a question, you get an answer back, but that there are all these strategic elements about, oh, I think I know the answer, I should continue searching. You get partial retrievals, you get to decide when you stop the search. And so in people, right, a lot of my thinking is about how things like meta-memory judgments contribute to knowledge search. And then on the computer science AI side, I think about, are there ways in which these kind of insights can be leveraged to create agents that can use large KBs effectively, and or right, that build models, or that would be good models for understanding how people do the same as well. And so for this kind of brief presentation, I really have several things in mind, right? So clearly my research interests overlap with cognitive modeling, and I know a lot of people here, right, also are, if not interested in cognitive modeling, are often interested in using insights from cognitive science and bringing it to artificial agents, right? So really, I want to talk about several things. And one is what kind of students are interested in cognitive systems, and in particular, I'm talking about in the liberal arts context, and Jamie would have more to say so that you have an N of more than one, right? But then also, what are some of the challenges in teaching students at a liberal arts college? So, like I said, Occidental is a small liberal arts college, so we have about 2,000 students, and it's all undergrad. So we don't have an engineering program, and students come in often not exactly knowing what they want. In addition to that, like I mentioned before, the computer science program is still relatively new, and so we only have a small faculty. Although it turns out the way that this has worked out, that we have all hired AI-ish people. But that's a whole different story about computer science. But Occidental, interestingly, also has a really strong cognitive science program. In fact, I believe the program was established in the late 80s, early 90s. So it's actually one of the first cognitive science programs in the country. And that meant that we have been able to attract a lot of students that are interested in cognitive science. I'll add here because of Chad Jenkins' talk, right? A lot of our students are also politically active and socially conscious. And so I have some questions about that in a bit as well. So one of the courses that I teach or I co-teach is actually our Intro to Cognitive Science class. And this is a course that is often co-taught by two different faculty in different disciplines. So in the last year, I've taught it with some of my cognitive scientist colleagues. We also have philosophers that contribute to this course. And this course really is a big melting pot of different topics, right? Including perception, language, memory, decision making. But what students are introduced to in this course, and some of the things that I at least talk about, right, even if they don't code, is about some of the bigger frameworks that we care about, such as boundary rationality and rational analysis, but also at least a very brief introduction to things like problem space search, deep learning, kind of very basic symbolic NLP. And what students come out of it, at least a little bit, and I'll say that these are not computer science students, these are not even necessarily cognitive science students. What students come out of it is, at least they kind of understand where a lot of AI systems fail compared to human cognition. And so I think one takeaway that here, right, is that one, there really is a lot of interest in cognitive systems, in both modeling and AI, in the general undergrad population, at least again for Occidental, right? What they're missing is a lot of the ability to participate, just given the lack of computer science experience, and as was already mentioned, right, that there's a lot of challenge in meeting the demand for computer science courses. I'll say here that the Intro to Cognitive Science class is also a good place to recruit women and students and minor students into computer science. And if people have questions about that, I can say more of what we've done in that area as well. So that's one class that we've taught that's very different and outside of computer science. The other class that people might be interested in is our standard AI class. And this covers that. I think this is relatively standard for AI, right? So we cover like search, reinforcement learning. We actually kind of go dip into several other things as well, Bayesian networks, etc. There are very interesting ways in which I make this class accessible to students that don't have programming experience. And so there's a link here, and I can put it in the Slack channel after this presentation of non-program ways for people to explore some of these AI approaches. But here is where we get to some of the challenges with cognitive systems. So one is AI is not machine learning, right? So that's one thing. But a lot of the research that we do is about combining symbolic and statistical approaches to build hybrid systems, right? So whether that could be reinforcement learning, that could be sometimes that's deep learning for higher dimensional work. And sometimes this is just supervised or unsupervised learning. And so what this means is that it takes the students a long time to get to learning enough about both symbolic AI as well as machine learning to get there. And that's assuming that they can take both courses in the first place, just because of the demand issue, right? So that's one challenge, right? Is getting students to the level where they can actually do something interesting with cognitive systems. Challenge two is that a lot of the systems that we build are complicated and unwieldy, right? So my own background is in the SOAR group, and SOAR has its own programming language that it takes students a significant amount of time to learn, right? ACTAR and companions are in Lisp, and that is in some sense better than SOAR. I put that in quotes. At least it's a language that people would actually learn outside of AI, but that is still a big challenge when students are taught programming in C or Java or Python, right? And that's not including the conceptual difficulties, such as understanding what decision cycles are, understanding and a logical matching, and so on. And so that leaves one of the challenges being that there's a significant learning curve, and that's despite the manuals and tutorials that that people in this area have put out. Although I'll point out here that Irina, who just joined our faculty and starting this fall, will be teaching a course on companions, and so that's one way in which so it's possible to teach these, but it's definitely not something that's very easy to compress or to slide it in incidentally for AI or machine learning courses. And so what ends up happening for me is that a lot of my students end up getting a lot of their experience through research. So I lead a research group of undergraduates, and they get a lot more of their experience there, especially if they're doing research over summer where they have more time to actually dive into some of these systems. But that is still challenging for architectural development, right? So especially for the kind of work that I do, if I'm interested in developing an architectural mechanism for feeling of knowing, right? That is really difficult in all of the systems I mentioned, just because there are so many moving parts. And there are so many interconnected systems that it's hard to carve out a problem that students can do in a semester or a year. And so really this comes down to two things that I'm interested in hearing about from people, right? One is, given that there are a lot of students that are interested in cognitive systems, but coming from backgrounds like cognitive science, neuroscience, philosophy, right? Are there ways in which we can get those students into our research programs, or how can we get those students into our research programs? That's one. And two is, are there ways of lowering the floor for interested students to play with and contribute to cognitive systems, right? And I recognize that a lot of the systems we build are inherently complicated, but maybe there are ways of reducing the complexity so that people can just dip their toes in and get a feel for what it's like to work with the cognitive systems without having to spend 2 years understanding the back-end code for SOAR, let's say. So that's where I'll leave you now. And again, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on these issues.
Thanks so much, Justin. So next we have Jamie Macbeth. You're still muted, by the way.
Hello, just unmuted. Very happy to be joining this panel today. And I will share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen.
You're all good.
So let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Jamie Macbeth. My affiliation right now, I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science at Smith College, and I'll say more about Smith College and how it is there. And my research is focused on representational knowledge and reasoning, representational issues in in-depth natural language understanding and story understanding. So yeah, let me tell you a bit about my my path. So my first my first position as an academic was at Fairfield University from 2015 to 2018. So Fairfield is a small Jesuit liberal arts university of about 5,000 students or so. I would characterize, and not to make a value judgment on this, but I would describe Fairfield at the time as having a tiny computer science department in what I would call the classical model. And I think a lot of small liberal arts colleges are like this, in the sense that the computer science department is basically an outgrowth of the math department, and Fairfield was like that and had a very small CS department. But like everybody has been saying, and I'm sure like so many of you all out there have been experiencing, exploding, burgeoning student enrollment and interest in computer science. So that was Fairfield University. I was there till 2018, and then, sorry. And then I was at, I'm currently at Smith College. Smith is a small liberal arts women's college of about 3,000 students or so. Smith has a somewhat larger computer science department, but still I would characterize it as kind of being still at having that classical model of a computer science department at a small liberal arts college. It's mostly a theory, mostly kind of an outgrowth of the math department. Many of the faculty are also part of the math department. We do have one systems person, but mostly the department is theory focused. And Smith is interesting because as a women's college, it developed a strong reputation as being a great place, great women's college for STEM. Smith was the first women's college to offer an accredited degree in engineering, the Picker engineering program, in 2001. And then also, just like everywhere else, Smith has experienced, but also as part of the reputation as being strong in STEM, Smith has experienced exploding student enrollment and interest in computer science. We had in 2014, there were 4 graduating computer science majors, and this year we graduated, I think, about 56 computer science majors. So been a huge increase in interest in computer science at Smith. So that's where I've been for the past few years. Now let me talk about classes that I've taught at these places. So at Fairfield, basically when I arrived, AI and cognitive systems hadn't been offered there for several years. It was still on the catalog, barely. And actually, I never got a chance to teach AI or cognitive systems at Fairfield University. So parts of my career have been dominated by this burgeoning interest in computer science generally. I almost exclusively taught CS0 and an intro to programming course, both to undergraduates, and there Fairfield has a master's degree in software engineering. I was teaching intro to programming to both master's students and undergraduate students. The only exception really was that I taught a capstone project course to graduate students where I was able to introduce some research topics into it, but it wasn't like really I taught an AI course there. So I never really taught AI or cognitive systems at Fairfield University. Things were just topsy-turvy because of the burgeoning enrollment. And at schools like Fairfield and also at Smith, there's kind of a generalist attitude where faculty can teach or are supposed to be able to teach many different topics, including intro to programming. At Smith College, again, AI or cognitive systems mostly hadn't been offered for several years. I think it had been offered once in the couple of years before I got there. But in that case, at Smith, in the fall of 2018, I taught an AI seminar strongly related to my research in natural language understanding. Due to a administrative glitch, I ended up with 29 students in a seminar class, which isn't really right. I think most of you would agree isn't really right for a seminar class. Again, this is a product of departments and faculty and courses getting mobbed by interest. Things went okay with that. In spring of 2019, I taught a mid-level course on intelligent user interfaces, which did include some AI material in there. And then in the fall of 2019, the spring of 2020, I was Martin Luther King Scholar at MIT, and I didn't teach at Smith or at MIT, but it did give me some great opportunities to observe teaching of Patrick Winston's 6.034 AI course at MIT. But so, this is supposed to be a panel about education and cognitive systems. And so I can say honestly that I haven't had too many opportunities to teach AI or cognitive systems. But I think the idea of this panel is that you're trying to, we're trying to bring together a cohort of junior researchers and educators to discuss the important topic of education around cognitive systems. So I'll give you my 2 cents about that, and I really look forward to the discussion. So here are my perspectives from being at a few kind of small departments at liberal artist-ish colleges. Like I said, many of these departments have never had AI or cognitive systems, or haven't seen it in a long time, or haven't had a person, faculty there has been devoted to it. I thought going into it that there would be strong expectations to teach, the big data, machine learning, and deep learning topics. And I found that actually that wasn't really true. I mean, because because of the fact that no one's been there teaching those topics, you have a great opportunity to shape the landscape for those topics. So you're not being crowded out by other courses being offered there on machine learning. Smith does have a statistics and data science department, though I should add that. But largely, that's been okay. I also think that small liberal arts students are not, they're expecting you to offer them something that's unique, that faculty at these small colleges, people are prizing the fact, or faculty are supposed to be take unique points of views and not just give you cookie cutter courses. Sorry, I shouldn't negatively characterize courses in AI that you might get at a larger university, but students are expecting you to give them something unique, not simply the latest technologies. Largely, there are some students who come into classes and they're like, hey, I want to get a job at Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and you need to teach me the stuff that's going to help me do good on the interview there. But there are many who are not, who are expecting something uniquely engaging. And so I think my view or my plan, or I think what's important in education in these kinds of environments, in small liberal arts college environments, is offering opposing viewpoints, debates and philosophical, historical debates in class, and critical perspectives about AI and about cognitive systems. And I think that fits very well. That way of thinking about the educational model fits very well with I think the point of view of the cognitive systems community about research and education about these topics generally, that it's a good fit. And I think largely in my courses try to make a strong integration with my research, and through the offerings in courses that are linked to my research to some degree or another, people are getting access to the latest technology, the latest points of view to some degree or another. And one thing I want to do more in the future is interdisciplinary teaching with psychology, philosophy. The nice thing about small liberal arts colleges is that those people, because you're not in a huge department, people in other departments are not that far away from you. And so interdisciplinary teaching and research are really encouraged. My asks, so what things I think I'd love to hear more about in the discussion that would be great to have in the community. Let's share course materials, activities, lab systems, etc. I just learned about Ashok Goel's materials and other stuff at Georgia Tech. I've the courses from MIT 68034 might be available to us, but generally that's an area where I'm really interested in collaborating. Now in this age, I think it's really easy for people to guest lecture and co-teach across institutions. So I think that's another interesting possibility. Another thing I think that's important is that especially at colleges like Smith, there's a strong encouragement for active learning, group learning methods, especially methods where people are going in class or going into small groups, discussing it in and coming back and discussing it with a larger group, and much less the model of I'm going to lecture for 50 minutes and I might ask a couple of questions. And so that's a challenge that I think I've found in thinking about how to teach these courses. It would be great. Do we have, or should we have, a cognitive systems textbook, an alternative to Russell and Norvig? Do we need one? There's Nils Nilsson's textbook, or it's not really a textbook. I mean, it's a great book about artificial intelligence that has nuanced views, but it's not really a textbook. Maybe McShane and Nierenberg have a book coming out. Maybe it could be adapted. But generally, I think whatever it is, it needs to have answers, opposing points of view presented so that there are lively debates in class about the vast many perspectives and broad points of view about AI and cognitive systems. But I look forward to the discussion. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much. So Tom, our fourth panelist, is held up a little bit. And so since I'm moderator, I get to just do whatever I want, which is, I've been looking at some of the chat in the channel, but I kind of want to ask my own question. So if at least temporarily until Tom can get back to us, if the other panelists can kind of turn on their camera and we can kind of get some discussion going. The topic I really want to talk about, and Justin started talking about it a little bit, is I feel strongly that having a diverse set of folks in any community is really a good thing. And this is both from background as well as demographics. And I do a lot of work on this, where I work at Northeastern as well as the Center for Inclusive Computing. And I know in computer science already there's the statistics are radically skewed if you look at gender, if you look at race and other things. So I'm kind of curious, each one of you, maybe go back through in the order that we gave the original presentations, about your thoughts of how we can make sure to have a broad, inclusive set of folks in cognitive systems.
Sure. Yeah, it is such a great question. And I really love what some of the other panelists were saying about how they think the cognitive systems can be like a good entry point. Because I think that's totally true, because there are students who come in and they don't really want to build an app that will analyze Instagram posts or something, but they want to understand human intelligence, or they're interested in like various sort of like cognitive conditions or something. And so I think that's really true. There's a story I heard one time, gosh, I can't remember where I was, but I heard this really great talk from somebody who was at like Harvey Mudd. And he was talking about how they had done this revolutionary thing, I think this was like years ago, where they were requiring intro CS for like all their undergrads. And so because they were doing that, they had thought a lot about the curriculum, and they realized that like a lot of the projects that are typical in intro CS courses are not always interesting to like a broad group of students. And so they had redone all of the projects to be like genetics focused, because there's a lot of things, like you can teach about for loops with genetics. You can teach about, sorting. I mean, you can teach, there's so much stuff that you can teach with like data structures and all this kind of stuff. So they had done this thing where those projects they thought might be more attractive to like, I think like women are, outnumbering men in biology right now. And so that's like a great, sort of like a topic to broaden the appeal beyond like, let's do like Pac-Man or something. And so I guess that's one thing that story always resonated with me. And that's one thing that I kind of think about is like, are there ways, like, even if you take like the standard AI topics, are there projects that we could do that would like be more, that would have like broader appeal? Is, I guess, maybe like just a thought. And I don't know the answer. And honestly, I mean, these might exist, and I haven't like looked very hard for them, but I'd be interested, if people at the conference know of things like that.
So I guess I'm next. So let me start by saying that I think Occidental has been really lucky in that we have managed to recruit students in computer science in general that are fairly balanced in terms of gender and race. I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, but I think the gender balance is 45 to 50%, and the various ethnicities are representative, if not of California, then of the country, I think. But yeah, so I think a lot of this, like I said in the presentation, I think a lot of these students are interested coming in from a kind of science and philosophy standpoint. And I think that's one where it's really useful to introduce, or that's where they get exposed to computer science and quantum systems, and that's also where they get interested in these topics. One of the challenges is getting them to follow through, I think, and taking the introductory courses. So and doing that well requires a lot of work, right? Making sure that the introductory courses touch on not just find the nth prime number, which is fine, but I think the computer science is so much broader now, right? That you can touch on things like algorithmic discrimination, and that feeds and that connects to some of the things we think about in cognitive systems, where all the ways in which deep learning can go wrong, right? All the ways in which deep learning or neural networks are fragile. So that really feeds into some of that. And so I think a lot of it is about making sure that your introductory courses, your data structures courses, your AI courses have examples that talk about some of these issues. I also say I'm kind of privileged in that I'm at a liberal arts setting, and so we actually have writing courses that I get to teach, or some of you I guess would frame it as that I will be forced to teach, but that these are ways that there. So I'm actually teaching a course this coming semester that is about all the ways in which technology has impacted society. This is again moving away from kind of systems a little bit, but I think the central point there, right? The overlap is really that we are interested in how humans do things, right? And so much of the ways we think are cultural, they're social, and so emphasizing those components, I think, is a way to make sure that students that have traditionally been marginalized get heard and get a voice in some of the work that we do. I think there are also research programs that are closer towards this. I know Jamie, I think at ACS last year, right, talked about deep learning and the ways in which that's biased or the ways in which it's fragile, right? I've done a little bit of work, not published, on biases in word embeddings, right? And again, these are ways in which you might tie that into your own research program as well. And I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment too, if possible. So Smith is a women's college, and so generally I guess you could say we don't, in many senses, we don't have to deal with the gender diversity part of the equation. Although there are wrinkles to that, but I won't go into depth into those. But we still do have an issue with racial and ethnic diversity in terms of, and usually it's manifested in our intro to programming courses, and that's something that we're trying to improve on. And I think when you're looking at, if you're thinking about increasing diversity in say an upper level course in AI and cognitive systems, it's really important to deal with the problems earlier on in the program, because likely you'll have prerequisites for your cognitive systems course that rely on the person having, students having taken earlier courses in the program. So that's something that we're working on, reducing achievement gaps, and that's an important issue. I think though also in the seminar course that I taught, the issues with ethics and also biases in AI and in cognitive systems were big topics, and so those are really important, I think. Because it's something that when people take an AI course, it's something that's on their minds a lot, and I think there are lots of folks who want to make sure that the topic of ethics is present everywhere in a computer science and AI or cognitive systems curriculum. I also think that the systems that we build, or the systems that ideally when you're having engaging active learning in our cognitive systems courses, where people are actually building systems, or actually building knowledge representations and knowledge bases and reasoning systems, that they're able to build systems that are interesting because they are, possibly, reflections of their own experiences, of their own culture, and things like that. And so that's one way to avoid it seeming like, oh, I'm building this system, but or I'm working on this topic, but the problem that I'm working on in relation to it doesn't really resonate with me, and it's resonating well with certain groups, but it's not resonating well with me. So I think cognitive systems have the capability to be broad and also be flexible and be more inclusive.
And we are still without Tom, so I just get to keep on asking questions. And this comes up a little bit in the chat, but also I think everybody here touched on it in some way, which is kind of the pressures that come onto a cognitive systems class with respect to kind of when someone says AI, it's, you know, deep something, right? I absolutely loved your little notes there. And I think it's not unreasonable for students, for a couple of reasons, to make that immediate assumption and have expectations of the class. So for one, from a job perspective, so some students are in school to get that job. And what are they looking at in terms of expectations? You're coming in, you know, Python, you know, Scikit, you can TensorFlow things. Let's just get that, and that'll get me my job. And I think that's not an unreasonable motivation for students. I think the other side of things, and there might be more, and I'm curious to hear, is that you easier access to case studies in a sense. You're talking to your phone, you have some sense that there are neural nets sitting on there. When you look at self-driving cars, you know, I got really scared when my advisor, John Laird, said that some of my research code might actually be sitting on a car. That scares the hell out of me. But right now, neural nets are dominating on cars. And so all these examples of AI are neural net types things. And so I think in part, are there these home runs, are these modern examples that are touching people's lives, as Jamie was saying, that you can point to and motivate and get people excited about? Or, well, let's just leave it there, and maybe whoever feels most excited takes it from here.
Well, I mean, I second the question, but I don't think I have any answers. I would love to know, yeah, like this is the kind of, yeah, just kind of like, yeah, this, I agree. It would be great to have some of those examples. And like, I'm sure they exist, but I just, it's, I think, you know, it's, now I'm starting to appreciate why it takes so much time to put together teaching materials, because like even just finding one example and being able to explain it takes like so long. So yeah, I would love if people had ideas.
And I think let's go ahead and finish up this round and this question, and then as the panel, we'll kind of take ourselves down, and Tom will get to introduce himself, and then we'll kind of come back to this. And Tom, if you wanted to be thinking about this, my general question was about one of the challenges of teaching cognitive systems, getting people into the research, kind of twofold. One is expectations that the world is telling you that just means deep learning and you're going to get your job that way, and that's what all the cool projects are and so forth. And so these I don't think are unreasonable sorts of reasons, and how do you combat that? How do you enrich your course to try to get more folks into cognitive systems? So if you want to think about that, maybe Jamie or Justin takes next.
Sure, I can say, so a lot of, in the last couple of years, the way I've been introducing students to my own research has been through a cognitive modeling lens. I think that's something where introducing the idea of working memory and long-term memory and all these different components makes more sense. And so inherent in that, I think, are the assumptions about wanting to build systems that match more or less how humans do things. So I don't have any good kind of, you know, home run examples of cognitive systems doing really well. But so that's one, right? Is that introducing students from a kind of modeling standpoint, and then building up to how do we get the system to do interesting things. Two is, again, I think highlighting the kind of shattering the illusion of deep learning a little bit, I think really is helpful. In all, not just the fragility, but also the lack of explainability, right? That has come up several times in ACS this year. And so I think when students see how fragile those systems are, I think they naturally gain, if not a critical lens, right? Gain an aversion to jumping straight to deep neural nets. And I think that's something that's useful. And then once they're open, once they see, oh, that's not everything, right? We can start introducing, this is why we need to have, we need to understand what is actually going on in the system underneath the hood.
Can I jump on to what Justin was just saying, just because it reminds me of something that I thought was so great from was this last year's ACS conference? And Jamie, you had like those examples from one of those captioning systems about how it was just kind of like, it was like interpolating just because there happened to be like a really similar picture in the training data. Like that's the kind of thing I feel like I love that. I still remember it a year later. And that's the kind of example I feel, because they think that so much magic is happening. And you can tell them all day long that it's brittle or fragile or whatever, but until you find an example like that, it doesn't, like that was just a beautiful example.
Yeah, you led into exactly what I was going to say, which is that I think it's important now, especially that people are very interested in active and engaging learning. It's important that rather than us having me giving a lecture that says, hey, deep learning is fragile, arrange for opportunities for students to learn that not really on their own, but learn that through their experiences and learn that in practice. You set them up. They're like, okay, we've got this deep learning system here. We'd like to do X, Y, and Z with it. Okay, how did things turn out? And so on. So yeah, but yeah, like you were saying, Maithilee, it takes effort to set up those opportunities. There's a certain sense in which if students are interested in learning deep learning, there isn't much to teach because a lot of it is just go to GitHub, copy some code, and run it, and look at the number, look at the answer, and that's almost in some ways that's kind of it. But I think it's important if students have opportunities to, okay, we're gonna build a network from scratch or something and have it do X, Y, and Z. We're gonna build networks and have them do particular tasks that don't look exactly like what you see in the magazine article or what you saw on TV about deep learning.
I think this notion of startup costs is really critical. I think that for getting students involved in research, especially undergrads who might only have a couple hours a week to devote to research, the startup costs, also in terms of like managing expectations, right? The startup costs for students is often completely overwhelming, both because in order to understand how to build these cognitive systems, the students need to have a lot more theoretical knowledge going in than they would if they were doing a data science project in terms of understanding what memory is and what attention is and all these different topics. But then moreover, just the code problem where you mentioned, like with deep learning, it's okay, download it off of GitHub and run this. Whereas with our, at least in our lab, the cognitive architecture we use, the one I used in my PhD at Tufts as well, it's 15 years worth of academic code piled up that is incredibly complex, and just beginning to understand what code lives where and what all of it does and how everything interacts often requires much more time to just get spun up than a student is willing to spend for undergrads.
So if all panelists except Tom can shut off their video, we'll give Tom the chance to do his kind of 10-minute slide thing. And while he's kind of getting set up, one thing I'll say is that there's some really good conversation going on in the Slack channel, including Shivali had a couple good kind of home run case study type things and some discussion about bringing in industry speakers as one possible approach to this. So really good conversation going on. Are you all set, Tom? You're still on mute.
All right, can you all see this?
All good.
All right, first of all, I'd like to apologize for the delay. I had a mandatory meeting with a program manager that went over an hour longer than scheduled. I'm sure some people know how that goes. So what I want to talk about is specifically some of the pedagogical challenges for cognitive systems in engineering education. So I'm Tom Williams. I'm from Colorado School of Mines, which, if you don't know it, is a small engineering-focused university in Colorado. We have about 5,000 undergrads and 1,250 graduate students. And if you look at the majors of students in mines, you can see well, it's about a quarter mechanical engineering, about a quarter computer science and electrical engineering, about a quarter biology, chemistry, physics, and by now my estimates of quarters have gotten all messed up, but we'll just call it a quarter of everything else, being civil environmental engineering, geology, geophysics, mining, petroleum, math, etc. So 2 things to notice here. One is that about half of our undergrads do mechanical engineering and computer science and electrical engineering, which is like core robotics, right? Which is really exciting from a cognitive systems perspective, because there's so many students who are interested in taking robotics-oriented courses and learning about robot cognition. In our department, other than required courses, machine learning, computer vision, AI are by far the 3 biggest courses, in part because so many people are interested in robotics. The other thing you might not notice here, though, is where's the psychology? In fact, Mines is I think the only sort of like top 100 research school in the US that does not have a psychology department, which is a little bit crazy because as a school that's very focused on design and engineering, you'd think we'd have some human factors, for example, but no psychology. So this is challenging because it means that I can guarantee that any undergrad who wants to come and learn about cognitive systems either in class or in research, I can guarantee they will have had no prior experience to psychology. It also, though, means that there are a lot of students who are interested in psychology, but have no way to learn about it in the traditional classes, and so they're eager to get other opportunities to learn about it, whether it's in elective classes or in research. So these challenges are true of a lot of the engineering curriculum. That the traditional engineering curriculum doesn't necessarily provide students with the prerequisites that they need in order to get the basics, in order to really dive into cognitive systems classes or research. This is true both for psychology and philosophy. But this is a broader problem for us as well, where it also means that there's no opportunity for students to get the sociology prerequisites they need in order to discuss topics relating to race and gender and class, which are really important for human-robot interaction, but in some circumstances could come into play in cognitive systems as well. So to talk about the courses I teach, for example, so we have a new graduate robotics curriculum, so master's and PhD programs in robotics, where we divide up our classes among perception, cognition, action, and interaction in society. I teach computer vision, HRI, robot ethics, and linguistic human-robot interaction. We'll ignore computer vision for now, because that course is really less relevant than the other courses I teach specifically to cognitive systems, at least the way we teach it. And all of these courses, being a small university, all these courses are cross-listed across graduate and undergraduate. So we really have a wide mix of students in the classes, although they're all coming from traditional engineering disciplines. This work broadly ties into the different types of research that we do in my lab as well, where we break up what we do into sort of human-robot communication based on, that is sensitive to different types of context: environmental context, cognitive context, social context, and moral context. And so the linguistic HRI course I offer really ties into a lot of this environmental context and a little bit of the cognitive context, specifically through the lens of cognitive systems. And then we also talk a little bit about sort of social norms and how those get represented in cognitive systems. My robot ethics class is, well, that is really just in the moral domain. In my lab, we do a lot of research on moral communication. And then finally, everything else gets tied into the human-robot interaction course I teach, which is really about more of the psychological side of how humans interact with robots. So the linguistic HRI course I teach, so it's a graduate HRI course. Students coming into it, I don't enforce, but I recommend that they would have taken AI or HRI coming in, because that gives at least some level of experience with the more cognitive system side. This is really a class on computational pragmatics implemented in cognitive architectures, and it's very cognitive systems focused. So as I mentioned before this in the general discussion, one of the big challenges I've had here is that, well, true cognitive architectures work, not just modeling of individual cognitive processes, but really the cognitive system requires introducing students to these massive complex systems and having students use these potentially massive code bases that require just an inordinate amount of spin-up time. And that's in a class like Linguistic HRI, where the whole class is about that cognitive system. In contrast, so or even worse, in my robot ethics class, this is a class where it is graduates and undergrads. We actually let students either take it for humanities credit or computer science credit, in which case students coming in either need to have taken global studies or data structures. And this course is really about moral philosophy and friends, and friends I mean topics in like social justice and power and things like that, and moral psychology applied to cognitive architecture design for robots operating in morally fraught contexts, which, as we argue, is really all contexts. And again, the challenge we see is that, well, we've tried actually having students do some cognitive architectures work in that class, designing mechanisms for moral cognition, but doing so, especially when it's just one module as part of a huge class, is really difficult because so much spin-up time is taken to get students used to the architecture before you get to the moral cognition piece. And then finally, my human-robot interaction course is really focused on the design, programming, and evaluation of social robots. And it's sort of funny because I am sort of half HRI person and half cognitive systems person. And you could take a very cognitive systems lens on this course, but I actually don't, in part because if it weren't for this course, we would not have any human-computer interaction courses in our department. And so I sort of feel like I need to spin it towards the HCI side to make sure students are also getting that information, which I think is also really important for engineers to learn. So backing up a step, though, you might say, well, all right, if you were to integrate cognitive systems into this curriculum, these are not the first place you would think of to integrate cognitive systems. Where would that be? Well, that would probably be artificial intelligence. And so this highlights sort of two challenges here. So first, there's the problem of integrating cognitive systems oriented modules in a wide variety of classes other than just in AI to maximize the chances that people get exposure to it. But the challenges are that students lack the opportunity to get the prerequisites to really deeply engage, and diving deeply into cognitive systems requires a lot of code-based understanding just to get started. If, in terms of teaching full AI courses on cognitive systems, well, I would love to do that, but there's only one of me and I need to teach other classes. And I think teaching that type of course, unfortunately for me personally, will have to wait till after tenure. And so the way I think I get most students involved in cognitive systems oriented topics specifically is actually through research. My approach has been basically involved. And any student who comes to me and says, hey, I'm interested in psychology, can I get involved in research? Saying, yes, here, come do some cognitive systems-oriented research with me, which has worked out pretty well. But again, there's only one of me. Only so many students, me and my grad students, can supervise. All right, and I will cut things off there. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk, and happy to contribute to the conversation. And sorry it was late.
Thanks so much. So why don't we go ahead and get all the panelists back. All right. There's lively conversation going on, and this actually connects to questions I have and that I think everybody has brought up in some fashion or other. So I'm kind of curious to do kind of an informal poll here about folks' favorite textbooks, favorite tools. In EAI, one thing we have, and 6E also has, this kind of like a nice repository where you can go to and adapt assignments, and that really, really helps. Different kind of startup costs than were talked about earlier, but absolutely a productive conversation to have. So if someone wants to share things they've found that they can point us to that other instructors might be able to integrate, and I guess this could be you know, a CS1 type thing that happens to have a nice topic to it, or it could be your graduate level advanced seminar class, either way.
I don't know who you're actually gesturing at, Nate, because the geometry, I don't know what the
Please go ahead.
I was actually going to say, I feel like, I think I need like another minute to think about, so other people can go first.
Tough question.
I will say, so we have in the past have constructed tried to reduce some startup costs, for example, by like creating a stripped down version of our architecture that we can deploy and use in classes. And I'm happy to share that if people think it would be helpful. But I think that, again, one of the problems here is, you know, it's the toothbrush problem, right? That, you know, everybody has a toothbrush but you don't want to use somebody else's, right? And it's the same sort of problem with cognitive systems, right? Where you put so much effort into whether it's diarch or companion or ActRS or, and then unfortunately that means that a lot of the specific coding type assignments, the way that like drawing a parallel to the model AI assignments, right, of EAI, right? Those are typically like highly, you know, general and like easy to use. It doesn't require a prior commitment to a particular like mammoth system. But once you have sort of made a commitment to a particular system, it can be hard to share those types of like coding assignments between locations because they just don't transfer.
I guess I can. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I can share an idea that's not actually it's not my idea, but my colleague Doug Fisher has done some things where I thought it was really cool, where he would take examples from around campus and kind of like build those. I guess this is kind of like a sideways answer to the question. It's not actually like a tool, but like, for example, if you're working on like scheduling problems, he actually sort of posed students with like, here's the current thing the registrar uses to schedule, and like, can we write something? And so I thought that, you know, kind of building it around your own campus was like kind of just a nice angle to take.
Yeah, I was going to say that people who've seen some of my research know that I study a lot of good old-fashioned AI systems, and I think one of the traditions from the 80s is that people would, you know, you didn't have an internet, so people would publish in their textbooks these micro versions of their systems, and so I think it could be useful. It could be useful tradition to start up. Maybe more people are doing it than I think. But I think it could be useful in more cases to have those kinds of things around. Also, I think it'd be great for us to share, because if I get one of those problems, say from Vanderbilt, that will be unfamiliar to students at Smith, there's a much greater value to it possibly.
So I have a follow-up to my own question. Unless Justin, did you want to? It's a follow-up to my own question. It's a connection to a question that came up in the channel, which is something we often think about in our group, our research group, is the idea that like, if you can really, really narrow the problem down, it might not be an interesting one for something as big as a cognitive architecture or a cognitive system. If you know what it is, you can probably write something focused and optimal for it. And so it's the really, really, really big problems that end up being the ones that you can't solve any other way. And I wonder if there's an inherent contradiction between the goals of a class, most classes, maybe unless it's an advanced sort of research class, and these cognitive systems approaches, or maybe that's a red herring. And so, you know, that's kind of one side of things. And at least in my brain, it's connected to the question that came up in the channel, which was, do you get closer to a cognitive systems approach if you show, maybe this is a stepping stone to a cognitive system, you show an ML, you know, a function approximator or whatever as a building block in something even slightly bigger. So it's not the entire system, it's not an end-to-end learning, it is one piece of something bigger, and there's a good reason for why you put it there. And there's good reason for it being there, for it being a neural net, you know, maybe a perception problem or something like that. And maybe that's a middle ground, which is to say, you don't have to solve all of, I don't know, natural language processing. So maybe you don't need the giant architecture, and maybe this is something of middle ground. So feel free to respond to anything in there that meets your fancy.
So I think that was a question in the Slack channel that I saw, right? I think there's a different question about evaluation / metrics of research. And I think that's one where, you know, a lot of the conversation so far has been focused on getting students to participate in cognitive systems research, but I think part of that training is also helping students understand what it means to be a researcher, and including, right, how do you come up with evaluations and metrics, right? So I think that I don't have a good answer for how to carve out good projects that cannot be, or that someone cannot hard code something or write a thorough neural network at. But I think getting students to think about what it is that they or the research program values, right? Or maybe even being explicit about, right, the fact that we care about human level performance, the fact we care about robustness, is something that students should learn, right? And I think it's worth it for them to also to then think through why a particular metric for a particular experiment is a good metric, and also why cognitive systems as a research program, how it's different from kind of the more statistical machine learning, and also why it's worthwhile.
I actually kind of like this idea of using like machine learning plugins as a way to trick people into coming and doing cognitive systems research, right? So sort of similar to what Cynthia Matuszek was talking about in her talk, right? So in our architecture, we similarly basically have a system where when doing reference resolution, when processing and understanding, you know, when processing a description of an object, we make it flexible, right? So you could, well, when the word red is used, you have some mechanism for determining whether or not the target is red, and we actually don't care about that, right? Most of what we care about is after that step, when you're in the symbols, right? But the architecture is flexible enough that you should be able to plug in different classifiers, you know, to tell whether certain objects have these different properties, and having students maybe get their feet wet by doing the machine learning work to develop those types of classifiers, while then learning why they're developing them and what they're plugging into, might be a nice way of, tricking students into getting into cognitive systems by way of the machine learning bits that we don't care, at least in my lab, that we don't care as much about.
I actually thought you were going to take a different approach. You made the point earlier, or a couple of people made the point about, you know, there are problems for which you kind of have to come up with a bunch of data in order to successfully apply some of the machine learning approaches. And so you can imagine coming up with, okay, I need the building block, you know, I need to build a system, and a part of it, it's actually really easy to get a whole bunch of colors of red or something like that, you know, pictures of it. And then there's another part where you know ahead of time, it'd be really, really hard to come up with a data set that would build anything reasonable. And so you let the weakness of the approach drive the choice of the tool, technology, method, something like that. Just a thought. Any other panelists interested in my vacuous sort of vague questions? So why don't we shift to something explicit that we've talked about in multiple ways, which is, you know, when is the right time to get folks in? So, you know, Justin was just talking about kind of getting folks into research. You know, we can see examples of textbooks and of courses that are, if you are a PhD student, this will make sense and this will get you there quickly. I think there are examples, and we've kind of talked about this idea that in a CS0, a CS1, I can put a problem in front of you and that might get you interested in it. I think the common sorts of intro to AI textbooks and your Pac-Man problems, your what's Berkeley's AI course, those sorts of materials are meant for probably second, third year of students that have programming ability, so it's kind of middle ground in there. We talked, the Harvey Mudd approach came up in different ways of, you kind of start them getting them interested in things, and then also in some of their papers, they talk about, first semester, and once you know how to program, let's get you in a research group. And that might be the way to get in. So I'm curious about both, what are your tips and tricks for getting folks into it at various levels, maybe an opinion about, when should students get into this. If the goal is, I found this really amazing person, they should absolutely be a cognitive systems researcher, and I need to get them there. Or maybe there's some point that's too early. So anything in the spectrum of when is too early, when is too late, how to achieve these levels. And in particular, I think if this goes back to the broadening participation, if we think about the population that gets out of high school, then the population that gets into college and then graduate school, there's a pipeline issue here. But if you want to get folks into this, early does actually matter. I figure the longer my question, the longer you get to look like you're thinking about it. So I'm just going to keep on talking and hope that this question made any sense.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a too early. Well, I mean, I guess, yes, there is a too early. If you are 5 years old, that is too early to get involved. But otherwise, again, I think it depends on what piece of the puzzle you're working on. So this summer, for example, in my lab, we have 4 high school women who are getting involved on a very, very basic, machine learning / data modeling problem that ultimately we're hoping, again, you could take those and plug them in a certain way. Are we having them get spun up over the summer with our robot architecture? No, that would not work well. But they are taking the summer to read a book on human robot interaction while getting their feet wet with this machine learning work that is inspired by cognitive systems. That hopefully then they will come to minds, and then they will join my research group, and then they can actually get involved in the cognitive systems work. But I don't think there's, within limits, really a too early to get involved in some way.
Just to throw out there for folks, and I don't know whether the person in the channel was thinking about this, but there actually is a movement right now, AI for K-12, and they have been building this up for a number of years now about kind of big ideas and then kind of curricular sort of work that could build up. So I don't remember whether a 5-year-old is where they're starting or not, but if this is something you're interested in looking into, they've already been working on this for several years, and at numerous venues, including EAI, is actually going to have a submission track this upcoming year, if folks are interested.
To clarify, I meant that 5-year-olds should not be getting involved in cognitive systems research, not that we can't tell 5-year-olds about cognitive systems.
So I sort of want to redirect the question a little bit, and I'm specifically interested in hearing from Tom and Maithilee about how you see the undergrad to grad student transition, and also kind of recruiting students starting in undergrad into grad school, right? Because some of the things I'm seeing is a lot of students just want to end up, working for Google, and they just don't want to do research at all. So I'm actually curious, in your setting, right, where you have both kind of students, and I know Tom, and probably both of you, right, include undergrads in your research, I'm curious how you do that and how do you manage their expectations?
That's a really great question. I think I've gotten really lucky with a lot of the students that I've recruited. Just for whatever reason, like a lot of them that are sort of genuinely interested in the research questions that we work on about like studying human cognition and things, sort of cross my path a lot. I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really great point that you make too about a lot of well, I guess maybe. I haven't done this yet, but I really liked Shivali's suggestion in the Slack about like having industry, like people who are working in cognitive systems in industry, like come and talk. Because I feel like that's also, like when you think about these pathways that students are taking, even I think several of my PhD students, like we're doing the stuff we're doing right now, but they actually do want to just go work at, to be honest, like they do just want to go do deep learning at Facebook or something. So not all of them. I shouldn't say that. And not that there's anything wrong with that either. But I think it's because I don't even know enough good examples to share, and so I really like Shawali's suggestion about you know, if we had more interaction with people who are in industry, I feel like that could really sort of like, you know, feed down through the levels of students and like show them these pathways.
I'll add to that and say that I think a strategy that we have tended to use in order to try to get to try to help feed students towards grad school while not scaring them off is to use sort of like a pyramid structure, right? Where we start students working in like groups of like 3 or 4 on a project, and if they're interested, if they, you know, and they're enjoying it and they want to continue the next year, then maybe they're working in like a pair. And if it's still going well, then you know, maybe you put them, they get, you know, their junior senior year, they get to like, you know, lead their own mini project or something, which helps students to, you know, when they're having problems with like understanding something in the code, they don't, you know, feel lost, and they don't feel, you know, reluctant to go and approach somebody because they have people who they're designed to work with. And then if somebody is really gung ho and, you know, knows they want to go the more academic route, then they're able to go and do something on their own. But
that's that way. Under the assumption that you can keep students undergrad students for 3 semesters, 4 semesters, right? I think that's, and
yes.
that's one of the tricky parts is that keeping students interested in research, especially from, I think grad students are easier, right? But undergrads in particular has a retention problem there.
I think one other point there is like when students are doing research, right? Are they doing it during the year? Are they just doing it during the summer? So like when I was an undergrad, I did research every summer. I did not do any research during the year. It ended up working out for me, but it also meant that there was no continuity between those, right? I was sort of working on a different type of project every summer, right? Whereas if you want students to be really building up something over the course of a couple of years of research in your lab as an undergrad, then you need to make sure that their semester, you know, if they're doing work in the semester, then there are opportunities for them to bridge that over the summer, or vice versa, right? If your department has funding for undergrad students to work over the summer, making sure you also give them the opportunity to work in your lab in some way during the semester so that they don't just fall off.
Did anyone else want to respond to Justin's much better question than mine?
I have to issue a small correction because I said it was Shawali's idea about the industry people, but it was Irina. So thanks, Irina.
So one curiosity. Earlier, I was kind of asking about tools and textbooks, and there was a deafening silence. And again, I give 5-mile-long questions, so that's possibly why. But I'd be curious, do you think that's a valuable contribution? Would you think that this is a good thing that a bunch of people should get together and start building? If there were the Pac-Man projects for cognitive systems, is this something we should be doing, that we should be asking the community or a subset to be working on? Or no, that's a terrible idea? Any thoughts?
Well, kind of along those lines, I'm looking through the Slack, and one thing I just want to say, you know, a lot of senior folks in the community are already offering up some of their slides, some of their links to some of their curricular materials, and I hope that we see more of that. And for those of you who senior folks in the community or middle or whatever level you're at, don't be surprised if I or other folks on this panel call you, ring you up to try to get more better connected and more materials from you, because I think it's a really useful thing. It's something that I think we need in the community generally. But yeah, that's not really so much of an answer to your question, but just a thanks to folks who are out there.
I have a slightly different response, which is the way in which I introduce students to research is often not I think getting them, or introducing cognitive systems in class is one thing, getting them involved in research is a totally different thing. And for that, I think there are some good papers that students can kind of read and understand, right? I think there are some, John Anderson has some kind of quite a bit older papers that get them involved with the distinction there with rational analysis. The Common Models of Cognition paper, I think, is another good place to start. So I think writing a textbook is a really time-consuming and effortful endeavor, right? But I think even having a page of here are good introductory papers that students might read to get into cognitive science or cognitive systems, sorry, I think is a good start. And I know there are these kind of resources in other fields, right, where it's just a public Google spreadsheet that you just put in the title and other people can edit it and organize it or whatever.
I think another challenge with textbooks is, which is not an argument for or against them, it's just a challenge, right? Within cognitive systems, right, is again this sort of like toothbrush notion of, well, do you choose a particular cognitive architecture and write a textbook, that is all framed around that architecture, which might let you tell a very coherent story over the course of the textbook, but then it might only be useful to the people who are choosing to use that architecture? Or do you take like a comparative cognitive architectures approaches where you actually show how these different, cognitive phenomena manifest in different types of cognitive architectures? But then that seems like you would need a lot of expertise from a lot of different people who work on different types of cognitive architectures all working together. And so I think it'd be difficult for a single person or even a pair of people to write like a textbook that would generalize beyond a single architecture.
And with that, I want to give folks a little bit of a opportunity to have a break between sessions, but I did want to thank our panel. So since everyone out there in digital world can't clap, I'll go ahead and thank you so much for your thoughts on this, and hopefully we do some great work going forward. So I will hand it over to Matt or Shivali.
Thank you. Thank you, Nate, and the panel. This was really, really helpful and really interesting. And we'll start the poster session now in just a few more minutes.